I don't think that quite makes sense, you know.
I had a talk yesterday with good old Benny Shapiro, and the argument that he made, because I was curious for it, because Ben Shapiro is a decent, intelligent guy, big respect for process, loves institutions like I do, and says as much. And his argument was basically...
Yeah, I just had heard that you were interested in talking with more right-leaning lawyers about Trump-related issues, and I love talking about all legal issues, so anytime you want to talk about anything legal, I'm happy to talk about, so... I don't really know what your position is on particular things. I could sort of state my position on all things Trump up front if you like, or we can go about any way you want.
Yeah. Hold on. I clicked to look at your YouTube channel again. I see a picture of you. Now I have an image of I just came from Louisiana. Okay, so I'm feeling the conservative vibes. No, I'm just kidding.
Fair enough.
Let me prepare my mind. Okay, here's actually a real quick question, okay?
Sure.
What is your legal background?
I've been a lawyer for 16 years, graduated from University of Akron. My background was in intellectual property law, patent law, computer databases, and search engines. I have a computer science degree. And I left about a year and a half ago to pursue full-time YouTube because I was bored and tired.
Okay, cool. All right. Where to start? Oh, man. For Trump-related stuff, how did you find my stuff, I guess? What was like, did somebody link you a clip of me saying I wanted to talk to people? Did you see a tweet of mine, or?
I forget exactly how it came about. I think someone had messaged me in my own Discord saying that you had indicated that you were looking for people, and I noted that you had interviews with Nick Rekieta and Good Logic, Joe Neerman. And so I thought maybe I could offer some different insights on the issues.
Okay. Yeah, well, fuck it. I guess I'm curious. Let's see if we can cover new ground. I'm curious. On the January 6th stuff.
Sure.
I'm of the impression that was an attempted, I'm using these terms like colloquially, so I don't know if I make the legal charge, but that for all intents and purposes, this was an attempted coup / insurrection / whatever you want to call it there, an attempted subversion of the peaceful transfer of power. And that this is maybe like a 2-month scheme, at least, that was kind of propagated by Trump and his team. Do you agree, disagree? Do you want to go deeper into that, or?
Well, I generally disagree. I do think that there were some people who were coordinated and planned. Mm-hmm. Some of the Proud Boys, for example. So there definitely was some evidence of some level of coordination by some people. Mm-hmm. But I think the Colorado Supreme Court did a reasonably good job at delineating the difference between a riot and insurrection in paragraph 183 of their opinion when they were discussing the issue, citing a treatise on the issue from Westlaw, where they said insurrection is distinguished from a riot and offenses connected with mob violence by the fact that in an insurrection, yes.
What can I Google real quick to bring up that Colorado opinion? I haven't read this. I'm assuming this is the one where they voted to kick him off the ballot 4-3 or whatever?
Yeah. This is the Colorado Supreme Court opinion. It's case number 2023 CO 63. It's a 213-page PDF. I can send it to you if you like.
I got it. Okay. And then what page on the document?
Sure. So I believe it's a paragraph 193.
Oh, okay. Let me find that.
$192 on page 103.
Gotcha. Okay. Is this the I don't know how the state Supreme Courts format this stuff. Am I reading, is this like part of the majority opinion or the dissent?
Yes.
Or this is the majority?
This is the majority opinion.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I read these 2 pages? Is that cool?
Yeah, sure. Take your time.
Okay, I'm going to start with the engaged in. I'll just read out loud so we're all on the same page. Dictionaries, historical evidence, and case law all shed light on the meaning of engaged in, as that phrase is used in Section 3. Noah Webster's dictionary from 1860 defined engage as to embark in an affair. I think this is the first time I've seen the dictionary cited in a legal argument. It's kind of funny, but okay. Not to say it hasn't before. I just haven't seen that in any of the Supreme Court opinions. But Noah Webster, an American Dictionary, the English language 696. Similarly, Webster's, blah, blah, I don't care about this. Attorney General Stanbury's opinion on the meaning of engage, which he issued at the time of the 14th Amendment, was being debated, are in accord with these historical and modern definitions. Attorney General Stanbury opined that a person may engage in insurrection or rebellion without having actually levied war or taken arms. Stanbury, blah, blah, blah. Thus, in Attorney General Stanbury's view, when individuals acting in their official capacity act in the furtherance of the common unlawful purpose, or do any overt act for the purpose of promoting the rebellion, they have engaged in insurrection or rebellion for Section 3 disqualification purposes. Accordingly, disloyal sentiments, opinions, or sympathies would not disqualify, but when a person has, by speech or by writing, incited others to engage in rebellion, he must come under the disqualification. Turning to case law, construing the meaning of engaged in for purposes of Section 3, although we have found little precedent directly on point, cases concerning treason that had been decided by the time the 14th Amendment was ratified provide some insight into how the drafters of the 14th Amendment would have understood the term engaged in. For example, in Ex parte Bowman 8 U.S. 75, Chief Justice Marshall explained that if a body of men be actually assembled for the purpose of effecting by force a treasonable purpose, all those who perform any part, however minute, or however remote from the scene of action, or who are actually leagued in the general conspiracy, are to be considered as traitors. In other words, an individual need not directly participate in the overt act of levying war or insurrection for the law to hold him accountable as if he had. Do I need to read further from here, or do you think that's sufficient?
That's good. And now if I could direct your attention back to page 98 and starting at paragraph 182.
Gotcha.
And
I'll go
read 182 and 183, and then we can discuss from there.
Gotcha. I'll go back to there just for the, I feel like for this definition of engagement, though, I feel like Trump, his cronies, and I think a lot of or at least the people that were in the Capitol on Jan 6th, I feel like they would fall under qualification from this. I'll go back and read the other thing, and then we can discuss this. You said 182? Sure.
Yeah, 182 and 183.
Okay.
On page 98 and 99.
Got it. So we've got, prior to this, the definitions of insurrection. In light of these and other proffered definitions, the district court concluded that an insurrection, as used in Section 3, is 1, a public use of force or threat of force, 2, by a group of people, 3, to hinder or prevent execution of the Constitution of the United States. Finally, we note that at oral argument, President Trump's counsel, while not providing a specific definition, argued that an insurrection is more than a riot, but less than a rebellion. We agree that an insurrection falls along a spectrum of related conduct. Insurrection against the government may or may not culminate in an organized rebellion, but a civil war always begins by insurrection against the lawful authority of the government. Although treason by levying war in a case of civil war may involve insurrection or rebellion, and they are usually its first stages, they do not necessarily reach to the actual levying of war. Insurrection is distinguished from rout, riot, and offenses connected with mob violence by the fact that in insurrection, there is an organized and armed uprising against authority or operations of government, while crimes growing out of mob violence, however serious they may be, and however numerous the participants, are simply unlawful acts in disturbance of the peace which do not threaten the stability of the government or the existence of political society. And then, but we part company with him when he goes one step further. No authority supports the position taken by President Trump's counsel at oral argument that insurrectionary conduct must involve a particular length of time or geographic location. Okay.
Right. So I think that these sections are helpful because they're trying to delineate different levels of evil, which is always helpful. If you want to think about it by comparison, just because someone kills another person doesn't necessarily tell you what kind of category of evil it's in, right? We delineate between like first, second, third degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, reckless homicide, and things like that. So we need to properly delineate where on the levels we're at, and I think that these sections in 182 and 183 are helping to do that, because as it says in 183, they say President Trump's counsel is arguing that there's a difference between a riot and insurrection or rebellion in various degrees of bad. So we have riot, then an insurrection, then a rebellion, and then in 183 they cite this treatise from Westlaw, Insurrection, where they note the paragraph that I was reading earlier, that's distinguished from a riot and offenses connected with mob violence by the fact in an insurrection, there's organized and armed uprising, whereas crimes growing out of a mob, however serious they are and however numerous they are simply unlawful acts and disturbance of the peace. So for my money, January 6th as a categorical is the wrong word, as an overall arcing concept falls in the category of a riot. And I've called it a riot since it first happened on my channel. I've done like 52 different cases where I've looked at individual cases and reviewed their criminal complaints, and for the most part found the government's case to be satisfied. But what seems to have happened, it just doesn't seem organized and armed in any sort of sense that I can understand. As the Colorado Supreme Court would say, some people understood it as a literal call to arms, a declaration of war, but the only gun I'm aware of that any of the protesters brought to January 6th was one guy who was a DEA agent who had a gun on him. I'm unaware of anyone else who had firearms on them or otherwise was prepared to engage in an overthrow of a government using the kinds of arms you would typically associate with such an effort. It was much more in the spirit of an impromptu conflagration of disruption that involved a lot of people and a lot of disruption, but it was not globally organized, and certainly was not globally armed. People were just not armed. They weren't bringing the kinds of things you would think. So for my money, it falls much more into the mob than an insurrection. That's my view.
Okay. Let's start with a couple points. So here's the first thing I think we can move off of. I don't think the armed thing is important. I don't think you think the armed thing is important either. Do you think it is, or do you want to talk about this point?
Well, I think if you're talking about where they talk about in the definition in 183, where they say an act of where you're trying to an act that threatens the stability of the government, you would really think that people are going to bring weapons to effectuate those means. I'm not aware of a lot of acts of rebellion in history that are attempting to overthrow the government where people are not adequately armed to accomplish that task. So I think armed is kind of important, yes.
Okay, here's a question. Let's say that I knew that there was a state legislature assembly happening, or there was a session and I didn't want them to vote on something, or I wanted to prevent the new governor from, I don't even know how governor coronations work, right? Let's say I'm trying to prevent this. If I brought 5,000 friends, I got a lot of friends, okay? Big streamer. And we all go there and we just, we don't bring weapons, but we're just going to go beat the shit out of everybody. And we're going to try to do what we can to overthrow the state house and take it over and prevent, the new governor from coming in. Would you say that, well, I know it meets every single definition of insurrection, but they didn't actually have guns, so it doesn't count? Would we really make that argument here, or?
I suppose if you could, I think I appreciate your point. And if you could show that the 5,000 people were all part of a collective organization that were engaged in collection action for that purpose, then I think you'd be a lot closer to something like that. But I also want to but on the flip side of the equation, I also want to distinguish acts that have been committed by perhaps more left-leaning people. For one example, they've disrupted committee hearings on Congress, or they've gone into the Capitol building to disrupt processes, or attempted to disrupt the confirmation hearing of Supreme Court justices, or otherwise engaged in unlawful behavior. I don't want to merge all those actions into an insurrection either. So I want to be even-handed about it in my application.
Sure, that's fine. And I think being even-handed is good. And I think if there's a particular case you want to talk about, I think those are all super fair to bring up. I'm just refocusing then on the part for the guns part. I feel like the gun part is the least interesting and least important part of the insurrection thing. I think that when we talk about insurrection, because it sounds like you agree with me that if I brought a bunch of friends, our goal was to, obstruct some government process, we're going to beat the shit out of everybody, and we were able to do it. I don't think anybody would look at that and go, well, they didn't bring guns, so was it really? Much the same that if I showed up with 2 guys, and we both had guns and we were just mad and we just went a shooting spree, in a state Capitol building, but we didn't even know there was a vote that day. We wouldn't say oh, well, that was closer to an insurrection because they had guns, right? I just don't think the gun part. I think when we say guns or armed, I think what we're really using this for is a proxy for an adequate amount of violence to effect some insurrectionist end. I think that's kind of what we're talking about, right? So you'd think, like, I agree with you. Typically, you probably need guns to do this, but not necessarily. I don't think it's like a necessary component.
I think then what you seem to be looking to is the intent to effectuate the disruption being the more important thing, rather than it being a spontaneous conflagration of people. So
Yeah.
a soccer riot is spontaneous. It can be quite disruptive, but it's not intentional. So the intentionality and purpose of it becomes the defining element. I think that's workable.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Because I'm sure we can imagine attempted insurrections with no firearms. I'm sure we can imagine state courthouse or federal courthouse violence with firearms and aren't insurrections. I just don't know if that's like a key distinguishing element. Okay.
I wasn't really happy when they were breaking into that federal courthouse during that summer when there was all those protests and mostly peaceful protests. There was one where they were attacking a courthouse and breaking in and causing disruption to a governmental building. So I wasn't happy with that, but I also wouldn't call that insurrection for the same reason. It's just a bunch of angry people who are just being jackasses.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that might be the case. Again, we can look at any particular case and try to decide. So if we look at the intention of the people going to the courthouse, or I should say the Capitol building, what is the goal when a bunch of people are marching down there, sent by Donald Trump, saying we have to fight to take back the government because it's being stolen from you, all chanting 1776, which refers to a famous rebellion against the British monarch? Yeah. What is like the goal of that protest?
So this is where I don't know that there is a particular goal that can be defined. There is a quote in this opinion where a professor attempts to suggest that Trump's calls to violence are to be understood literally, even as other politicians who use terms like fight are not to be understood literally. And I find that to be a slightly disingenuous. It's like it's only literal when Trump does it is a little bit unnerving. I want to look at it in a even application. So for the same reason, I wouldn't say, when Hillary Clinton says we need to fight, or, anyone else says fight, I wouldn't say that's a call to insurrection. For the same reason, I just find it to be typical political vociferous language that isn't to be understood literally. People initially came, at least in large part, to attend the rally at the Ellipse. I don't think that, although I could be mistaken, I don't think that people who came to the Ellipse were aware that there was going to be a march to the Capitol. That seemed to be kind of a spontaneous thing to have their voices heard. So I don't think the vast majority of them went down with any particular intent to commit crimes. And I don't even think the vast majority of them who went down did commit crimes. To the best of my knowledge, the FBI identified something on the order of 1,200 people who committed offenses, but there were significantly more people at the Capitol than that. So again, it seems more of a mob-based thing that some people chose to go in rather than the intent of the crowd at large.
Okay, that might have been the case, but then again, I'm going to ask once more, and we can talk about the different. Well, actually, I'm trying to think of what. Well, here before we get it, I'm going to get into this like different people using fight differently. Okay, but
sure.
What do we think we're protesting when we're marching to the Capitol after Donald Trump's speech? Like, what do you think is the protest for? What are we protesting?
Well, I think generally speaking, people were protesting the legitimacy of the election, which also is not necessarily invalid in some ways. Mm-hmm. Although we didn't, of course, see that in D.C. as much, in the result of Donald Trump's election, there were significant protests in multiple cities protesting the legitimacy of the Trump election, and people saying it was illegitimate, and to some degree continue to say it was illegitimate during his entire presidency. So I think people saying that we do not believe this presidency to be a legitimate presidency is neither unprecedented nor unusual.
Okay. I can work with that. I think that's okay. That they're protesting the legitimacy of the election when they go to the Capitol building to protest. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. When we look at the outcome of what happened from all the protests, we can see that there was violence, right? Even if there wasn't that much, there was some violence, with, I believe, 2 people getting killed on the spot. I think a few other had heart attacks or meth overdose or something. But
I believe it was only the one who got killed on the spot. I believe the officer who had a heart attack, it was determined it was not caused by the incident.
Well, I wasn't even thinking the opposite. I was thinking of Babbitt, and there was another lady outside. So there was violence.
I'm unaware of the other lady, so I'll take your word for it.
Sure. There was violence. There were 2 people killed. We agreed that there was like violent trespassing or breaking and entering or whatever.
Sure.
And then the certification of the election was delayed by like 6 hours or something?
Yeah, a couple hours. I'm not sure exactly, but something on that order, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I guess here's like my question. I feel like from what we've agreed to, I think that these are all necessary and I think easily sufficient to define an insurrection. So we agree that initially a bunch of people went down. We don't need a ton of weapons to commit an insurrection. We just need sufficient violence to effect some outcome or goal. The intent was to protest the legitimacy of the election, and the outcome was the delaying of the goal was to cancel it. What was the delaying of the certification of the vote to prevent the peaceful transfer of power? Don't we have like every necessary thing here for this to be like by definition an insurrection?
I would disagree on the intent. I agree there's intent to protest, but I don't think the protest in and of itself is illegal.
I agree that protesting in and of itself isn't illegal, but if your goal
I don't think there's intent. There's not intent to by the crowd from the start. There's not intent from the crowd at the start to that I can see. That's readily apparent to effectuate violence. I think it's more of an organic thing that arose rather than what they designed to do as they were heading down that direction.
Yeah, but what was the goal of going down to protest when you're protesting the legitimacy of the election and you're chanting 1776? And you think that the election wasn't illegitimate. Like, what are you going down there besides to try to prevent the stealing of the election?
Well, I note that some people think this is whataboutism, but I'm just trying to apply an even standard because I want it to be the same across the board. So I want it to be fair. So in the same ways that when people were protesting the election of Donald Trump and went down to D.C. to protest to some degree, and there were protests in other major cities to significant degrees at times. What were the goals of those protests? I'm not sure there necessarily was any goal of those protests other than to protest and express their displeasure, which is certainly a legitimate end. So if and to the degree that those protests against Trump manifested in violence, that the violence occurred doesn't mean that was the intent. It would be more organic. Now, I have absolutely no problem prosecuting all these people who committed crimes. So everyone who committed a crime on January 6th should be held accountable according to law. And in my review of 50-something cases, I only found one case where I thought, yeah, the government didn't have it. So,
okay, yeah. I'm not even looking at like protesting the. I'm not even looking at protesting the protests themselves being good or bad, or like protesting something good or bad. But I think that we can look at the intentions of a crowd based on like what they're protesting. And I think that's the issue that I'm looking at here, that I feel like we're divorcing when we compare like BLM or other protests to this one. These guys were very specifically marching to the Capitol building to protest not Biden, not whatever. They were protesting the certification of the election. Because they thought that, like you said, they thought it was an illegitimate election. They thought the election was stolen. So if you go down to protest... Go ahead.
Do you think it's the location of the protest that makes the difference? The fact that it was the Capitol?
The location and the time, yeah. I think are key, of course. Yeah, for sure. I think they're like paramount. That probably the most important aspects of this would be the location and the time. Yeah. Do you think that location and time is an important factor in terms of like trying to figure out the intentionality of a protest?
I'm trying to think about what are comparables as I'm trying to apply an even standard. So I can certainly think of protests that have occurred at state capitals, protests that have occurred to go to the seat of government to picket and express displeasure. For example, when I was living in Virginia, when I did for many years, Martin Luther King Day is, of course, a federal holiday, but it's not a holiday for Virginia as a state law, or at least it wasn't at the time.
Okay.
And the state legislature in Virginia only meets for like 4 months, and they start the Monday before Martin Luther King Day. So as a result of that, it was very common for people to go down on Martin Luther King Day, because a lot of people have the day off, to go to protest, and a lot of people did, and I did every year to go to protest. I went to the seat of government, and I ran up and down the halls of the state legislatures to speak to my various representatives and make my voices heard, and then went outside to express my displeasure about things. So I don't think the fact that I went to the seat of my government and expressed my displeasure indicated intent other than to make my voice heard and to advocate for my causes.
What were you protesting for?
In that particular case, I was protesting for broader gun rights, because I'm a Second Amendment guy.
Do you think that's comparable to protesting like electoral certification process?
Well, I don't see how the subject matter of the speech turns the difference, because the First Amendment protects all subject matter.
Well, hold on. That's not true. Wait. That's not true. First Amendment absolutely does not protect all types of protests or types of speech or whatever, right?
As to subjects, it does.
What do you mean by that?
As to topics of discussion, right? So if you're thinking, for example, like defamation and slander and fighting words as exceptions to the First Amendment, then yes, but it doesn't restrict as to subjects or topics. So I can talk about anything. I might be restricted in some ways about how I go about it, but the topic itself. So I can't think of any subject in which I don't have a First Amendment right. If you can name one, like what can I not go to the legislature and demand that they take attention of issue X? Is there any issue X that I can't demand that they take notice of?
No, I can imagine you can.
Yeah, so there's no restriction on subject matter. That's my point.
I would definitely agree with that. I think that if the January 6th protests would have just been protests outside of the Capitol building and no trespassing or violence would have occurred, I think that'd be comparable here. But that did happen, and once crimes start to get committed, I think then we have to go back and we have to look at. I think that we can start to be more critical of the subject of the protests, right?
I don't think that quite makes sense. If my group that had gone down there to protest for gun rights had spontaneously become violent, which fortunately never happened, but if it had, then I don't think that changes the intention for why we're down there in the first place, or our ability to use sharp rhetoric. So as we're out there, protesting for our rights, I don't think the fact that violence occurs somehow goes backwards in time to change our underlying intent. If we'd gone down there for the purpose of creating disruption, if we'd gone down there for the purpose of engaging in physical violence, if we'd gone there with the intent of physical or other sort of desire, then I think the intent is what carries through, not the actions that emerge. The fact that actions occur turns it into a riot, not an insurrection.
Okay, let me hypothesize two different speeches. Okay.
Sure. Okay, go ahead.
Let's say here's some facts. Okay. We're gonna say we're investigating a situation and we don't know the initial speeches. Okay, here are some facts we're given. Okay, a group of 100 people march to a state building. Okay, we're gonna say they're all pro Second Amendment rights. Let's say that they all during the protest end up entering the building. Let's say that violence ensues between protesters and police, and let's say by the end of it, 7 protesters and 1 police officer are killed, and then eventually everybody's cleared out. Okay. So so our facts are: we got 100 people march to a state building. They're all pro Second Amendment rights. During the riot, they're there to like protest for Second Amendment rights. Let's say that I'm going to add that here. Okay. Well, no, I won't add that yet. I'm sorry. I'll do the speeches. Okay. They all, during the riot, end up entering the building. Violence ensues between protesters and police. 7 protesters, 1 police officer are killed. Okay. Those are 5 facts, right?
Sure.
Okay. Let's say now that we get video footage of the, let's say that we get video footage of the leader of the rally speaking prior to the people leaving to go and march to the state building, okay? Let's say that in one world, let's say that a speaker is like, today in our state legislature, they're gonna ban Sonic stocks, okay? We believe that it is our Second Amendment right to have these stocks. This is bullshit. We are going to go and make our voices heard. Everybody pick up a sign. We're going to march outside, fuck these guys, blah, blah, blah. Okay. That's speech 1. Okay. Sure. Let's say that, in another world, we get insight into what's going on. And let's say speech 2 is today, there's a new governor who's going to be sworn in, and he is opposed to the Second Amendment. They're going to steal our firearms. The government is coming after our firearms. We're going to lose our Second Amendment rights, okay? We will not stand for this guy to be in government, okay? Today's when they swear him in. We're going to go down. We're going to protest like hell. We will not accept this guy as our new governor, okay? Let's say that's the second speech.
Okay.
When you look at the 2 of these, and then both of them end up in violence, and both of them end up with a couple people killed, and they both end up delaying the certification process, in that world, wouldn't we say that, well, for the first speech, it kind of seems like, they protested, they were trying to make their voice heard, shit got rowdy, whatever. But for the second one, man, it really seems like their goal was to try to actually obstruct the certification or the appointment or whatever, not appointment, the election or whatever the fuck of the new governor. And they actually kind of succeeded in that end. At least they delayed it. Would you not weigh these things differently based on the rhetoric and everything going into it?
Well, if what you're alluding to is incitement, which seems to be what you're discussing, then I would go to Brandenburg as the test for incitement. And because it's a well-honed First Amendment law. So speech is not protected under Brandenburg.
Well, hold on real quick. So I'm not actually, I'm not even interested in the crime of incitement. Which I don't think Trump has even been charged with incitement, any of the incitements, any of the big cases. Yeah. I'm just saying that for the, in terms of like an insurrection, or in terms of like what the goal is and what the outcome was, would we not weigh the speeches and the rhetoric and everything going into these? Would we not consider the outcomes different based on the rhetoric and everything going in?
I understand where you're coming from, and I don't think it's wholly illogical. But my sort of natural inclination is to try to find, as best I can, a bright line between what's legal and what's illegal, because I don't really want to be squishy when it comes to the First Amendment. I have a pretty broad First Amendment view because I believe that people should be allowed to speak their mind, and they should be allowed to disagree with each other, including rudely and whatever else. And for that matter, I don't think there should be laws against hate speech. I don't think you could even define what hate speech is. And there are no laws against hate speech as such because it's undefinable. So I think the reason I went to Brandenburg is because I'm looking for a legal test that separates the legal from the illegal. So while I agree that they're in your hypothetical, the speech that is more inflammatory is certainly closer to the improper line. I don't think this should be a balancing test, or, if it's more inflammatory, then we don't need I don't think it should be balancing, which I think you're tending to suggest. If it's more inflammatory, then we don't need as much, or if it's less inflammatory, we need more. I think we should try to figure out from a First Amendment point of view what speech is protected and what's not. And as long as it's protected, as long as it's on the right line, then it can be as inflammatory as the person wants it to be because it's fundamentally protected First Amendment speech.
Okay, well, is there anything that would qualify for you as an insurrection that doesn't involve incitement to riot?
Oh, sure. Yeah. You wouldn't necessarily need speech at all if you could show the coordination in advance. You don't need the speech to be the prompt. It could be that a group of terrorists somewhere in some.
Why would you need? What
backwoods-
would the coordination look like? And then I'll just, so that it doesn't. I'm not trying to trap you, because whatever coordination you give here, I'm going to ask why. My next question is going to be: why is Donald Trump sending 100,000 people to the Capitol to protest the certification? How is that not a level of coordination? That's what I'm going to ask next. So tell me what the.
There's coordination for a lawful purpose and coordination for an unlawful purpose. I mean, for example, you and I have coordinated in order to have this talk. So the fact we coordinated didn't make it illegal. So the coordination needs to be unlawful. That's like the difference between a conspiracy and just, going out for a meal together or something. So I think in the example of a non-speech, you'd be looking towards, a person who gets together, for lack of a better description, a group of militia people who go together with the affected intent to engage in violent disruption, which I think is true for the Proud Boys in December 6th, Oath Keepers perhaps as well. And you could also find other groups that are comparable in other situations. So
sure, but what about the fact that the majority of the people that were indicted, I think, is like trespassing and committing violence? I don't even think the majority of them were Proud Boys or Oath Keepers.
No, that's correct, and I don't think those people engaged in insurrection. I think they engaged in a riot, which manifested in trespassing and.
So if those people thought that they were going to the Capitol and they were fighting on behalf of Donald Trump, who was going to lose the presidency because we agree there was a rigged election, and they were chanting 1776, which is when we fought for our own insurrection and rebellion against the British, and they effected violence to achieve some end of delaying the certification of the vote, which they did. I don't understand what possible element we're missing here to make this constitute an insurrection. We have everything except for the fact that it failed.
Well, I'm not sure how much you think the situations are comparable or not, but wait, before because everybody likes to make comparisons and jump to BLM and other stuff. I'm just, in this particular thing, what are we missing for this to be an insurrection? I feel like every single element is easily met. I don't know what we're missing. I don't.
What part of an insurrection do you think hasn't been satisfied at this point? What definition are you working with for insurrection that hasn't been satisfied at this point? What are we missing here?
I just don't see the coordination in the sense that that would form a crime where we're in concert with each other in the normal sense.
But they're literally tens of thousands of people walking together down the street in a coordinated manner, coming from a speech from their leader to go to the Capitol building where the electoral certification is happening, to all protest at the same time, and then all enter the building at the same. There's a highly coordinated. What could be less coordinated?
Well, see, that's where you're to my mind tripping up. Because you're assuming that the intent to enter the building as part of the thing, and I'm not sure that's true.
I don't know if the intent, but I don't know if that intent has to be there, right? How one of the, I'm sure because you did crim law and you're an attorney, right? How some people think that premeditated means that you have to be at home and you've got to have your death note and draw out a whole plan. And if you don't do all of that, then it's never first degree murder, right? But that's not true, right? For premeditation
can form in an instant.
In an instant, yeah. So why would we say that there needs to be this intention formed hours or days prior to going to the Capitol if every single other element is met? You're going there, you're chanting 1776, you're waiting for Pence to unilaterally overthrow the election, you're protesting, and then there's riots, and then they're breaking into the building. Why can't all of the intent for that insurrection stuff develop organically alongside the riot? Isn't that what they're there to protest?
I think that's mostly right, but it's the problem is trying to delineate between the mob violence and the insurrection violence as we're trying to maintain these distinctions to the degree we want to maintain them.
I don't think we have to delineate.
What's the difference between a mob versus an insurrection versus a rebellion?
I don't think there needs to be any delineation. For instance, in the U.S., here's my guess. I don't actually know this. I'd be I'd be shocked if I was wrong. But my guess is probably in any major rebellion or insurrection, not everybody is there to rebel or insurrect, right? I'm sure even in the American Revolutionary War, some people were probably just looters. If we would have lost, not everybody would be equally culpable. Some were probably just fighting for, right? Like not every, but same thing with like a riot, right? Like if there's my guess is going to be for any riot with 1,000 people, there's probably only actually like 50 to 100 people like fucking shit up. I doubt all 1,000 people are breaking shit, but you'd still call the whole thing a riot, right?
Yeah, I think that's mostly correct. I don't think mere presence necessarily means you're part of the riot, but yeah, to the extent you're engaging in unlawful acts, then you'd be part of the riot. Your mere presence there wouldn't make you part of the riot. I mean,
sure.
although it wouldn't necessarily be wise, I can go to a riot and just hang out. I'm not sure why I'm doing this, but I could.
Sure. To be clear, I'm not trying to say that if we're trying to go on the argument that every single person there was an insurrectionist, I wouldn't make that argument, right? I don't know if that's the case or not, but like this is kind of the sum of its parts, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts is greater than any individual, or whatever, right?
So
the whole event itself was definitely an insurrection. Maybe not every individual actor was an insurrectionist, but that's my feeling, and I feel like that every element of this has been so easily met.
I think you certainly could make the cases to some individuals. I just have a problem with calling the thing as a whole an insurrection. But as you know, some people have been charged with seditious conspiracy and convicted, and I don't have any problem with that.
Sure,
so
but I'm
if
just
you
curious,
want to say that some people engaged in insurrection, I think that's fine. Because they went down there with intent, and the government has been able to prove they went down there with the intent to engage in violence, and it was coordinated and planned and so forth and so on. So that's fine.
Sure, but I just don't understand, like, why we wouldn't just call, like, what element is missing? What else would we need? So if we have some people that were convicted of seditious conspiracy, if we have, like, a lot of coordination, we've got a lot of violence, we've got a delay or an obstruction of a certification of a vote, like, what element are we missing where you'd be like, okay, well, now I'll call it an insurrection?
Well, if we're trying to I suppose it depends on one of two things. Are we talking about Trump specifically, or are we talking about the crowd as a whole?
I'm just talking about that event on January 6th, that particular.
Yeah. So
event, yeah.
I think if I'm trying to categorize the event as a whole, then the fact that I can find people that engage in insurrection, which I'll concede for the purpose of argument, as I'm trying to talk about the crowd as a whole, I want to look towards, I suppose, for lack of a better description, the most common denominator. Because I don't think it's fair to necessarily say the crowd is tainted by the worst of its actors, you know? If I go down to a riot and I break a window and some other guy murders a guy, you know, I don't think that necessarily it's fair to lump me in with him. You know, we had two very different sets of actions.
Well, but we wouldn't we? Like, if... now I'm going to use your phrase, like being even-handed. I don't think we would ever say for a particular riot, we would never say, well, here's a riot. Actually, I know we wouldn't, because we made fun of CNN for doing this.
Mostly peaceful?
Yeah, those protests were mostly peaceful. But it sounds stupid to say that because, like, you know, it only takes a few people in a protest to make a protest a riot. Protest doesn't become a riot when every single person or over 51% of the people are rioting. You would say if there's enough people rioting, oh, it's a riot. And that would be it, right? And if we're looking at the event on January 6th, we would say, oh, it's an insurrection. That doesn't mean most of the people there were engaged in insurrectionist violence. It just means that you had at least enough people there to enact violence, to try to obstruct an official proceeding for the peaceful transfer of power. They were marching down there ostensibly to protest the very thing that they ended up obstructing. Like, it just seems like a very clear, easy, shining line to draw from A, B, C, D, E. Like, every element is met, every threshold is crossed. It's like, so it just seems like very obviously, plainly laid out. I would just ask again, like, what are we missing? Is your argument, I guess to reframe what you said, you need at least 51% of the people there to call it an insurrection? Like, they have to be like in the building, or yeah.
I don't. You make a good point by comparison, and I think it was a solid point, because how many people do you need just to call it a riot? So let's go with what you say. Basically, you just have a standard old protest, and then some people engage spontaneously in riotous behavior. So how many people does it take to make it a riot? That's a good question. I don't know that I know the answer to that question, but I think there is some threshold, which I'm not sure exactly what it is, because if you had, I don't know, if you had 100,000 people go down there and 100 people got into a brawl, I don't know that either you or I or the public at large would consider that a riot. So there is some sort of proportionality threshold. I don't think it's necessarily 50%.
Sure.
I'm not sure what it is, but you do raise a solid point.
And I would agree with you 1 billion % there that if we were making these same arguments and the whole crowd marched down there and like 10 or 20 people were fighting with cops and, they got arrested, even if like 2 or 3 of them killed a cop and then cops killed them or whatever, I don't know if I would necessarily say insurrection, maybe not, I don't know. But I think that whatever threshold we were going to set, that threshold is probably way behind. Hundreds of people are breaking into the Capitol building. Congress is being evacuated. Calls are being made everywhere to bring in the National Guard to clear out the Capitol building. And is this the first time in all of U.S. history that the electoral vote certification has been delayed? Like whatever threshold we're setting for the violence being qualifying of an insurrection we're probably way after that point. That'd be my guess. Like we're probably going to argue over like how much fighting with the cops outside needs to happen before we call it an insurrection, or does somebody need to break in, or how many people need to break in. Whatever we set it at, though, we're way behind people looking through the glass at where like statesmen are with the Secret Service like shooting them through the other side of the door, I think, right?
You raise a good point. I'm not sure it's you've given me something to reconsider. So you might have the better end of the discussion on this one, because you're certainly correct that what happened and sort of how it happened resulted in a manifest disruption to not only a legally required process, but a constitutionally mandated process, which incidentally, as a personal right, just pisses me off personally, because we're supposed to be the party of, Constitution, law, and order. And then I have a bunch of assholes who say that they're part of my political and legal delineation, who are engaging in constitutionally abhorrent content, and makes me a very grumpy person inside because it's making us all look bad. So, but you make a very solid point here that because of what manifested, to view it as an insurrection might be reasonable. So yeah, it's an interesting argument. And then you're just trying to say to yourself, well, does the fact that, assuming for the sake of argument, it wasn't planned in advance in some sort of collective, like we're going to go to some sort of, corkboard and put up postcards with string kind of territory, like we're planning a job. If it's not coordinated in something resembling that sense, is the fact that it resulted in this disruption to the Constitution enough to call it insurrection? It's a reasonable point.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like all the elements are important. If it was just like a random protest or random thing, I think the time matters. I think the location matters, and I think that the events matter, because like what's being protested, I think is important. I feel like the process stuff is really important too. I think one of my annoyances, I don't know if you're a Trump guy or not, but one of my annoyances with a lot of the populist stuff is typically, I'm going to side with liberals or progressives when it comes to social values and whatnot. But at least prior to Trump, if I was going to defend processes, it felt like usually I was siding with conservatives, because there was it seemed like kind of there was a better respect for process and rule of law and whatnot. So I would be like siding with conservatives, fighting against progressives and liberals when we're talking about like packing the court, for instance, or stuff like that, where it's like, well, is this a good idea? But I think the disregard for process on the conservative side, just my feeling is that it has thrown everything into whack. I think Donald Trump had every right, I'm quoting Jack Smith basically, Donald Trump had every right to say the election was stolen, to feel the election was stolen, and to pursue that through the courts and everything. But all of the other pathways, like the Eastman-Pence plot, I thought was insane.
Yeah, to argue that Pence had the power to unilaterally overturn the election is one of the more insane arguments I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, and then did you ever follow or hear any of like the whole false elector slate stuff?
Yeah, that was pretty stupid too.
Yeah. And then like there's like 20 other random things. Yeah, the DOJ stuff and everything. Yeah, I feel like yeah, I don't know, that really bothers me, I guess. And then it's scary that it's scary to let people see that stand, I guess. One of the things that's kind of frustrating to me is this convo will come out in a few days, but I had a talk yesterday with good old Benny Shapiro. And the argument that he made, because I was curious for it, because Ben Shapiro is a decently intelligent guy, big respect for process, loves institutions like I do, and says as much. And his argument was basically he's okay with Donald Trump being president again, even if he tried to overthrow the government, because at least he failed, so he knows that the guardrails work. But it's really scary if you have somebody that literally tried to overthrow the government. And I feel like Trump did. I feel like that's pretty obvious, I think. Those are other arguments we could have. To give that guy a second run at it is really scary to me, I think. Yeah.
He certainly isn't my first choice.
Who are you a supporter of in the nomination cycle?
I'd either pick Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis.
Gotcha.
I kind of am partial to Nikki Haley personally. A lot of my fellow conservatives think that she's a neocon, and I can't even figure out what that means anymore. Apparently, it's just the disagree button. So,
how do you feel about
she did great as governor of South Carolina. She really transformed the state, and she did wonderful as UN ambassador. Well spoken. I like her.
How do you feel about I'm just kind of curious, I guess. Wait, neocon doesn't mean anything to you?
It's just I've had people try to define it, and it just feels like it's a I disagree button, like kind of like calling someone a rhino.
Gotcha.
Just means whatever they need to mean at the time.
Okay. I feel like for me, neocon, the big difference between Bush era conservatives and then the Trump era conservatives, I feel like the two huge disagreements are over big businesses and foreign policy. So like a Bush era conservative would say something like Facebook and Amazon are amazing because these, well, I'm ignoring all like the social media police or whatever, but just like they're huge American businesses that are innovative, that are dominating the world, that employ tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of people. These are amazing at Walmart, right? That neocons would champion that. And neocons would also say things like, we need to be a staunch ally of Ukraine. We need to defend democracy. Israel is an important ally, this type of stuff. This would be like a neocon position. And then a Trumpal position or like a populist conservative position or post-Tea Party position would be like big businesses are leeching from nice small businesses. They're scamming all of us because they're ran by the billionaire elite class. And we need to stop dumping money into shitholes like Ukraine and Israel. And we need to spend that money on our own population and stop worrying about the rest of the world because it's just causing us terrorist attacks and making us waste money on other countries that we don't need to spend money on, basically. I feel like those are the two huge differences between like the conservatives of 10 years ago versus the conservatives now.
Well, in that distinction, then I'd definitely be more aggressive on foreign policy. So I'd be more of a war hawk because I think that as von Clausewitz once said, war is politics continued by other means, and I think that's roughly correct. And I think we have a place in the world to effectuate change with force as needed. I probably am a little bit more tempered on big business is necessarily always a force for good. I definitely think that I support, for example, anti-monopolistic law, Sherman Antitrust Act. So to the extent they're engaging in antitrust or other improper business dealings, we need fair business dealings. It needs to be a fair exchange. I also tend to oppose any sort of corporate salvation or corporate, funding. I was not a particularly happy camper, for example, when they bailed out all the banks in response to the crash, because it's like, well, you guys got yourselves in this mess. You can eat it now. You can take the bad side of your own mistake. You took all those wonderful benefits when you got them. You didn't mind that. So, but now you want our protection because it all went to hell. It's like you should eat it. So I have perhaps a more moderated approach.
Sure. Do you I disagree on the bailouts, but principally I agree with you. The only issue I would have is I feel like the bailouts were probably more for the American public than the actual big businesses themselves, because I think if those banks would have failed, the executives and everybody probably would have walked away fine, right? Because they made their money, they got their severance packages. But I think that the U.S. economy might have come crashing down if that had happened.
I feel like there's got to be a better way to go about that objective rather than just giving the monies to the banks and bailing them out because they're too big to fail. There's got to be some better way to do it. Maybe we basically turn ourselves into the creditor of last resort as we force them into disillusionment bankruptcy. And we're going to help them unwind their business so that it doesn't all go completely to hell, but they can't be a business anymore because they suck. But these businesses still exist. They got nothing. Their executives got, all these wonderful awards and bonuses and stuff for basically crashing the whole economy. It's like what happened to Lehman Brothers should have just happened to everyone. Why are these companies allowed to continue to exist? They took all this risk. They thought they were smarter than everyone else. It all went to hell. It's like, take accountability. Take the benefit and pain of your decisions. And the U.S. government has to figure out a way to help people. There's got to be a better way than you just give banks all the money ever.
Yeah, I agree with you in principle. It can't be private gains and social losses.
Exactly.
I agree with you.
That's not capitalistic. That's not capitalism.
That's pretty bullshit. Yeah.
That's just not capitalism. The principle of capitalism is you get to go out in the world and rise or fall by your own merits, and whatever be will be. And it's like you can't have capitalism where it's like, yeah, all the banks are great because they're doing great work and look at how they're rising, and then suddenly they make bad decisions like, well, now we're gonna bail them out. What? This isn't capitalistic. This isn't BS.
Okay, final question for you. Actually, I'm curious. What did you said that you did copyright law and stuff?
Principally patent law. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just
for inventions, computer database inventions.
I'm curious because I
used to be a programmer.
Yeah. You said you're the comp sci degree. For antitrust in the U.S. right now, antitrust is enforced by the FTC, right? It's not the FCC, right? It's the FTC. What is the argument that the federal? I should just read this. I'll research this someday because I always ask this question. I never get good answers. How is it that some companies are allowed to buy other companies? Like, why is Amazon allowed to buy literally anything? Or why is Activision allowed to buy Blizzard? Why is Microsoft? Why was Facebook allowed to buy Instagram? What is the argument given? I guess that these things don't fall under antitrust, like prohibition. Like, you're not allowed to do this.
Yeah, so the basic principle, at least in the idea, is that in a capitalistic system, you can rise as big as you want as long as you are not using that power to prevent newcomers from coming into the market. So you rise by your own merits on a level playing field, and you can't then change the playing field to protect yourself. So I don't really believe in protectionism. To sort of answer your question about why Facebook or Amazon or anyone else is allowed to buy people, the thing that the government is supposed to look to, and the DOJ looks to, is whether or not it will leave sufficient avenues open for other market participants, or whether or not it is unduly restricting the market. And where they choose to draw those lines sometimes is questionable, but that's the idea.
Yeah, I feel like in the little bit of reading that I've done, I feel like that's the bullshit part, is where they draw the line. So like there might be like 5 mobile game MMORPGs, and one guy steps in to buy every single mobile game, and the FTC looks at it and like, well, you can't do that. And the guy's like, oh, but look at all these other apps that people use on their phone. Like, they only use gaming apps like 10% of the time. And they're like, oh, okay, well, in that case you can do it. It just seems really silly to me. And then I also feel like this gets into like finance and business startups and all that. So it's not directly related, but like I feel like from a capitalistic point of view, I don't like the corporate culture in the United States where the goal is to like found a successful startup and sell it to a huge company immediately and then cash out in a year or two. That just seems super fucking cancerous. I guess. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I suppose if you are such a person and you want to take advantage of, assuming you've generated something of value, and someone's willing to pay you for something of value, it's like, well, I got mine, so I'm happy. I don't know. You should be allowed. The alienation of your property is pretty fundamental to capitalism. It's like, I should be allowed to sell it.
Yeah, I know, but I feel like the idea of like having people that want to have successful businesses and run them and compete with others is a healthier mindset for a more competitive economy than if we make a really good app and we do well, maybe Amazon can buy us. I feel like that's cancer. I don't think I like the super business idea in the United States. It works well. I think if you wanted to be like really pedantic and you wanted to have like a really well actually debate, you could argue to some extent that, look, socialism actually does work. Instead of the government running everything, it just needed to be Amazon. Because in some ways it is nice that I can order every fucking thing I might need in my life off of Amazon. But in other ways, it's kind of annoying then that now like Amazon has huge problems, especially if you've ever bought anything and you see all the dog shit products and everything on there. But there is no realistic competitor. And realistically, nobody is going to compete against them or come up to compete against them because they bought 50 billion other businesses and hired every fucking talent. And I don't know, it's just annoying. Yeah.
At least for the moment, that's true. But I wouldn't get too black-pilled about it because businesses rise and fall. The companies that were, in the S&P 500 100 years ago are basically all gone.
Do you think that's true?
Yeah, it's mostly true.
I think that something that was kind of scary is, or something that I wonder is, do you play video games at all or no?
I do. I've been playing RimWorld a lot recently.
Oh my god!
And I've also been thinking about getting into Kaizo Mario hacks.
Oh, I haven't played that one. I think I've got almost 1,000 hours of RimWorld. Oof, what a game!
Yes.
For a while, like games come and go, like every 2 to 3 years, I think, right? Like a game comes, maybe people play for a little bit, and then a new game comes out, and you kind of move on. But then we have like this concept of like an infinity game, right? How long has League of Legends been a hugely popular game? Over a decade, right? Over maybe 15 years. Or like people look at like, oh, nobody's around forever. Look at the rise and fall of things like LiveJournal or LiveBlog or Zynga or MySpace. But then you look at like Facebook and it's like, well, how long has Facebook been around for? Like 15 years, 20 years maybe?
I'm sure as you're aware, Facebook has been having problems. Their future is by no means guaranteed. Not for the least of reasons that they burned so much money on the whole metaverse thing, was basically $2 billion set on fire. That didn't help.
Yeah, but I mean, when the problem is, I think in the finance world, it's a little bit different than the normal world. In the normal world, when we say like, oh, people are having problems, we mean like, fuck, I'm going to have to sell my house. I feel like in the finance world, when people say, oh, Facebook is having problems, what they're saying is the average user acquisition is decreasing because like 4 billion people are on the Meta platform, and there are literally not enough human beings now to grow their stock of people. So they're missing like quarterly, aims or whatever. I don't know if Facebook is going anywhere anytime soon, or Amazon. I could be wrong, but I get scared because like the longevity of these companies is way longer than we thought they ever would be like 20 years ago, right? Nobody thought 20 years ago that you'd get these super giant companies online that would last for over a decade or longer, and just have their hands in so many different things.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I'm not necessarily opposed, incidentally, to reconsideration of where we draw these lines when it comes to monopoly law or other things. I think I take a more moderated view than, your classic idea of at least how you delineated it from Reagan. Big business is inevitably good. So I would not be opposed to reconsideration of the laws, as it would affect our ability to ensure that small businesses are allowed to thrive, because you never know where the next innovation is going to come from. I like those like old photos of Amazon.com when it was literally just Jeff Bezos, working in a cubicle, and it was Amazon.com, hastily written on some sort of paper or something that was just hanging above his desk. Yeah. It's like, it was just a guy with a dream once long ago. And who knows where the next dream is coming from?
Yeah. Well, right now, I mean, I guess that's my thing, is that like, it feels like 20, 30 years ago, the guy with the dream's goal was to run the biggest company in the world. But nowadays, the guy with the dream just wants to sell his startup to the biggest company in the world. That's what it feels like. But I don't know. Maybe things will change. We'll see, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Anything else you want to chat about? Or wait, hold on. I can give you roles. If you ever see me screaming, or if there's ever like a law thing you want to argue with somebody about or come in and fight about, you can always hop in this channel. You should be able to see it now, and you can shout at me or other people or whatever. So,
ooh, I get a channel? Exciting.
Yeah. Destiny's Room. Good luck.
Aw. Yeah. So I noticed that you were covering Epstein. My view is basically he didn't kill himself. My view is, I think there's like multiple different scenarios. He just killed himself in the first instance. He was basically allowed to kill himself because the guards kind of looked the other way. Someone actively killed him, and he's still alive. And of these scenarios, I think that he just offed himself is the least likely.
Gotcha.
So I think he was an intelligence asset, and I use that word very deliberately, as opposed to an agent.
Okay.
Because I don't know if he was necessarily an agent of anybody, but I think he was an asset of somebody. And I think it's just the whole scenario of what happened to him just strikes me as truly incredulous. At the MDC where he was being held, they hadn't had a prisoner off himself before
like 20
Epstein.
years, I think.
It's like 25 years. Like, they have an incredible track record.
Yeah.
Epstein first tried to kill himself once, the tapes of which were conveniently lost/deleted despite a retention order. So they were just magically deleted somehow, despite a retention order. Then he goes over to segregation for mental health. Then, in fairly quick order, he's then sent back to his cell. He's supposed to have a cellmate, but then somehow magically doesn't. The cameras are conveniently not working. The guards are asleep at the switch. And I'm saying to myself, this is some BS. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy-minded guy, but come on. This is a lot of stuff that's happening.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I just read a lot of preliminary stuff yesterday, and there is a lot of weird stuff. Can I ask you a personal question? I'm just kind of curious on this, because it's something that I have to wrestle with as a content creator a lot. So sometimes weird things happen. And how do you personally try to figure out, like, when something is obviously a conspiracy? I'm sorry, I'm using a literal sense. Like, there was a plan, something happened, people concocted to do something, versus when it's like, man, that is pretty unlikely, but I guess maybe that is how it happened. And the example I'm going to give here is, I'm so sorry, all my examples are so politically loaded. I don't mean them to be that way. But I genuinely believed that the intelligence agencies, and just accept what I'm saying here as being truthful, okay? Even if you disagree, because there's a reasonable argument here. Right? I think the intelligence agencies really did think that that laptop story with the Hunter Biden laptop, that was a Russian propaganda story, because that was a wild story. If we're being honest, okay, even though now it
is a wild story.
Yeah, it seems like it's true.
ridiculous.
Yeah, it seems like it's true. It does seem like that really was his laptop. But like the idea that like a blind computer repair shop guy had a laptop dropped off by Hunter Biden and he happened to contact Rudy Giuliani, that is an incredible story, right? But rather than saying that, like, well, that was definitely a conspiracy because that is wild, it's a wild story. It's like, well, damn, maybe weird fucking shit can happen sometimes. Like, maybe it does. Do you have like a personal sorting mechanism through, especially when you get these cases, like for Ray Epps, I don't think it's as weird as the Epstein stuff. I don't know if you ever Epps. I'm sorry, but like for the Epstein stuff, where there are a lot of like pretty stupid coincidences. Like, these guys were sleeping the whole time. They didn't monitor him. The one tape that was working is unusable. The 2 cameras are out. How do you get from, man, that's really fucking weird, and I guess there's just a lot of unlucky shit here, versus there's probably something going on here. I actually think there was some kind of plan or plot. How do you bridge that, or how do you jump that bridge in your mind, I guess?
I'm not sure I have a systemic answer for that question. So I'm not sure I can give you a good, satisfactory answer. I suppose it's just based on the evaluation of the available information and the totality of circumstances, which isn't really a great answer as I try to go towards a principled policy, I want to apply things evenly standpoint, because I'm now doing things in an ad hoc manner, which isn't ideal.
Sure.
I suppose with respect to the laptop story, the problem, at least to my view, was that there was some indications of credibility. For example, that there was a signed repair order from Biden that brought it some credibility, and also the fact that the media suppressed the story from a reasonably reputable source and prevented it from circulating seemed questionable at best. So I don't know if I have a good, satisfactory answer to that question. I suppose I go with the idea that I assume malice rather than, or I assume ignorance rather than malice. I assume that people are just being stupid rather than malicious as a general rule. But it just seemed, and also like other things with respect to Epstein. For example, it was Acosta, I believe. Is that who the guy was who was the, was that his name? Who was the U.S. attorney at the time in Florida, who later joined the cabinet, who basically gave this ultra sweetheart deal to Epstein. Like,
I haven't dug into that yet, but the 2008 deal looks on its face to be really stupid to me. I need to dig into the details
so
of that,
they go to Epstein's place. They find him with all kinds of CP, which he has thoughtfully cataloged with dates and names and like everything. It's basically very well documented CP. They find all this stuff. They wanted to charge him on the state level. the U.S. attorney gives him this unbelievably sweetheart deal that Epstein, or at least Ghislaine Maxwell, later tried to argue immunized her because of how broadly it was written, where he basically pled guilty. They gave him probation, which he never reported to, and no one cared. And they had him absolutely dead to rights on all this stuff. It's like, why would the U.S. attorney make that deal and basically make the state charges go away? And he was quoted, the U.S. attorney was quoted as saying that he did it because it was over his pay grade. Like, what do you mean? You're the U.S. attorney. What do you mean over your pay grade? There's not a lot of people that outrank you, man.
Sure.
So
yeah, I would have to end up looking. I'll end up looking specifically into that detail of like what that case looked like. I feel like a lot of these come down to. Did you ever follow the Bill Cosby stuff?
Sure. Yeah. It was a very interesting case on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision about whether he should be retried or not. It was an interesting discussion.
If you're saying, for instance, that like they had Epstein dead to rights, then everything becomes very suspect. Like, why the fuck are you cutting deals here? But like, I know, for instance, for like the Cosby thing, I think Cosby's conviction ended up getting thrown out because some of the testimony they relied on, I think in a prior case, they'd agreed to never use, basically. There was, okay, well, fuck you too. I think I disconnected.
I'm back. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Clicked the wrong button.
Yeah, but I was saying that like for Cosby stuff, his conviction got tossed because prior testimony was considered inadmissible, which on its face seems kind of bullshit. But then when you dig into the earlier case, it was because the testimony from that one woman was probably reasonably decided to be pretty unreliable. That like in front of a jury, they probably wouldn't accept it that much, and the chances of that, going to trial and securing a conviction was highly. It was questionable. It was in the air whether they would. So that's why they went with that plea deal. So I understand that. But I'm curious for the details of the Epstein case, how dead to rights he was and everything. Because if what you're saying is true, yeah, everything about that deal seemed pretty stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was just living way beyond his means, and no one seems to have, in the press, asked like the necessary follow-up questions. Like, how did he get his money? What did he do? People have said he's a traitor. Who did he trade with?
Well, what was Epstein's businesses, or how did he...
Well, he was supposedly some kind of hedge fund manager, was supposedly what they said, but, that leaves a paper trail because you're buying and selling a lot of stock. Where is the paper trail? Who is he buying from? Who is he selling to? Where are the records of all the stuff? No one in the press seems to be asking any of the relevant follow-up questions. Where did he get his money? Who is he? Weinstein Eric Weinstein has commented that he seemed like a manufactured person. He met him in person once, and he seemed just like a creation of someone's imagination, a synthetic person, because he didn't act the way that an ultra-rich person should act. He seemed like he was not that way, and he would do these bizarre things like use an American flag as a table cover and other things that just seemed off. And he just seemed like no one's asking these questions. The press doesn't want to know. The fact that the press is not asking the questions about where he got his money from and all the rest of it, where the trade records are. Yeah.
Okay.
Who did business with him?
Well,
Conspiracy. I'm doing my whole X-File routine over here.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I guess we'll see what I find about him. All right.
But normally I don't run to conspiracies, but that's certainly one I believe in because it just seems there's just so many details at so many different points in time where it's like something is not adding up in this equation. But I've enjoyed talking with you. It's been fun.
Yeah. If anything else ever comes up, or if you hear anything, or people tell you to jump in for whatever, you can always hop in the room and yeah.
All right, cool. Well, hopefully we can do something again. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye-bye.